West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
There are times in your briefings where you seem so comfortable. Then there's times where you seem frustrated by the lines of questioning. So I want to know what the job is like versus what you expected it to be like.
Well, I'm a human being, so even though every day I try to be completely even-keeled, and always my objective, per the president's direction, is to treat people with respect and take questions and provide accurate information. That's my goal every day, but I'm also a human. And sometimes when you're answering the question, the same question a 10th time, or when a question, more likely the things that get under my skin are when a question, the premise of a question is based in inaccurate information, misleading information, that can be frustrating. I try not to show it too much, try not to let people see me sweat too much, but occasionally I have a moment of humanity.
Well, so those questions that are based on falsehoods, they come from brands like Newsmax, which does sometimes get called on in the briefing room. I know a lot of liberals don't want Fox News to get called on. I think they should be, but I know a lot of liberals, a lot of Democrats don't want it. So why do you call on Fox News and Newsmax?
Well, Brian, we know there's a lot of different points of view on this, as you just referenced. But my point of view, and more importantly, the president's point of view, is that the story is not about me or a debate with news outlets. The story is about the plans of the administration and what we're trying to project to the American people. And when he pledged to govern for all Americans, that means talking to a range of outlets, liberal, conservative, people who have different areas of interest. So that's exactly what I try to do every day in the briefing room.
He said in his inaugural, we all have a duty to defend the truth and defeat the lies. 5 months in, do you feel you've made any progress with that, defeating the lies?
I try every day to. And Brian, I think one of the things I try to focus on, or we all do in this administration, is not undervaluing the intelligence of the American people. When people ask a question that is based on a false premise or a question that skips over some details, what we try to do on our best days is be informative. Explain how a process works. How does a bill become a law? What's the importance of communicating or going to the G7 or NATO? We don't need to completely dumb things down. We need to speak about things in an accessible way, but we have a responsibility to peel the curtains back in governing and government and how things work. And, we think the American people will hopefully respond to that. What our assessment is of our success, I will tell you, I never thought we would be successful in rebuilding every element of trust with the public in 5 months. It's going to be an ongoing process and something we'll keep working on every day.
Obviously, the press corps wants to talk to the president more often. Why haven't you held more than one press conference, one big press conference?
Well, Brian, I have an interesting statistic just for you in my back pocket that Martha Kumar, I'll credit, shared with me last week. In the first 100 days of this president's presidency, he took questions from the press 77 days. I don't know how that compares historically, but he takes questions several times a week, is almost always open to have that engagement with reporters, and I expect that will continue to be the case.
Now, on Friday, a reporter shouted a question and it was answered, but the setting for a formal press conference that demands the country's attention, you all have chosen not to go that route. He doesn't give many interviews either. Is that part of an attempt to lower the temperature, be less visible, be boring?
Certainly not. I don't think anything we're doing around here is boring. Getting the pandemic under control, going on our first foreign trip, putting millions of Americans back to work. I don't know what version of that is boring. But I will tell you that there's an opportunity several times a week for the president to have an engagement and answer questions from reporters. I understand there's questions about a formal press conference, but that may be driven more by the media than it is by the American public, Brian.
I figured you'd say that. You know, you used to be on this side of the camera. You were a CNN commentator in between your time working for the Obama administration and now working for Biden. What did you learn here? What did you take from CNN, and how does it apply to your job now?
I mean, a lot. One, you know, when you're a CNN commentator, a commentator for any network, you do spend a lot of time sitting on a set, being prepared to give your input on a breaking news issue or an issue that's developing in real time. And that's certainly good preparation for standing in front of the camera at the briefing every day. And there also are a few people who I may have sat on that set with in the past who had strongly different views from mine. And that sometimes is replicated in the briefing room with some questions or the line of questioning that comes up. So I tap into a lot of things I had the honor and pleasure of doing in the past, including being a CNN commentator, including serving at the State Department, and I know that helps me in the briefing every day.
Well, there's a version on the liberal blogs of something that goes like this. Psaki smacks down, Psaki shuts down a questioner. It's this narrative that we're seeing, people celebrating you for doing it, and yet that kind of reminds me of cable news and the way that the cable news engages. I'm not sure that's always actually good for the country, even though it might be entertaining.
Well, look, Brian, I think, one, I'm not putting out those assessments. What I will tell you, though, is that I also have a responsibility not to allow the briefing room to become a forum for propaganda or a forum for pushing forward falsehoods or inaccurate information. My best preparation from that was actually serving as the State Department spokesperson when there were representatives of the Russian and Chinese media in the briefing room asking me questions that were directed by their government. So we see that from time to time in the briefing room, not every single day at all, but I have a responsibility to the public to make sure they're getting accurate information and the premises of questions that are propaganda pushing are not giving them inaccurate information.
And speaking of inaccurate information, you were asked on Friday at the briefing about Facebook and about the ban against former President Trump that's in effect now for almost 2 more years. You said the Biden White House wants the platforms to crack down on disinformation. But what does it actually mean in practice? What do you envision that looking like?
Look, there are a range of ways to do that, Brian, including, these platforms, how they attract users, how they're tracking the information that is going out there to the public. Certainly, it's a decision by them who is allowed to use their platforms. As I also said on Friday, we know a lot about former President Trump and how he uses these platforms, and it feels pretty unlikely he's going to massively change his approach over the next 2 years. I guess we'll see. But there's a lot of ways that these platforms can take initiative, can take steps themselves to ensure that the American public is not getting, or the global public, to be honest, is not getting inaccurate information.
For other PR professionals who watch what you do, for journalists who watch what you do, what's your advice for them about trying to stay close to the truth in this world of lies?
Well, I think what I try to do is stay grounded to the facts, and what I mean by that, the details, and what we can help provide publicly to clarify context, to make it more understandable to the press, to the public, and sometimes it's not more complicated than that. Really talking to policy experts and gaining an understanding myself so that I can communicate in a way that my mother, my mother-in-law, other people who are not involved in politics like you and I are every day would understand what we're trying to do. I keep grounded in that, but try to go deep in the details so I can kind of pull out and make it accessible.
Well, that's the common thread. I know this is often adversarial, but it also has to be functional. Is the relationship between the White House and the press corps now at least functional in ways it wasn't in the Trump years?
I think so. Look, I think I go into the briefing room every day, and I think the reporters do the same thing. They're going to ask tough questions. They're going to push me where they want more information. They want me to give more information. That's their job. My job is to provide as much information as I can, the president's point of view, what our policies are to the American public. Sometimes I can't provide every single detail as what's happening privately because it's a private negotiation or a private discussion, or there's a national security issue at play. That's a push and pull. But that's a healthy push and pull, part of our democracy, and something, frankly, returning the briefing is something that sends a message to the world that we're not afraid to engage. We're not afraid. We believe in the free press, and it's part of the message that we're going to now project, even as we go on our first overseas trip next week.
I should mention that we pre-taped with Psaki on Friday before those new revelations about the gag order at the New York Times. Otherwise, obviously, we would have asked about it. I did ask her when the press briefing room will return to pre-COVID norms. So let's get to that. But first, some personal questions. You recently told David Axelrod that you envisioned being in this job for about a year. And that's partly because, it's a grind and you're going to hand it off to the next person. Is that still what you're thinking timing-wise? So does that mean next January is when you envision handing it off?
We'll see, Brian. I mean, I always serve, like any of us, at the pleasure of the president. He asked me to serve in this job. Hopefully he doesn't fire me tomorrow, but, it's always who he wants to serve in this job. I'm not walking out the door at day 365. I think what I was conveying to my old friend David Axelrod is that, there's an opportunity. One of the roles I love to play in this job is an opportunity to lift young talent and new faces up and give other people an opportunity to be the front face and shine. I also have 2 little kids who are in preschool, but this is a job of a lifetime, a huge honor to serve this president in this time. And, I'm not running out the door at a specific mark, but I do want to give others an opportunity, and I do have my kids in mind and spending time with them.
It is Monday, the 7th of June of 2021, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is River City Hash Mondays. Yes, another weekend has ended, and another week faces us straight in the face. How are you? Well, we made it through the weekend. It's not like the weekends that we had from the previous guy, isn't it? It's great, actually, in some respects, except for one small fact. Democracy is being held by a slender thread, and it's being yanked really hard by a guy down in the holla. What's up with Joe Manchin? Well, it turns out, according to Jane Mayer, and not so much according to her, but as a reminder, of course, it was through Jane Mayer that we all heard the Heritage Foundation, that PAC that they had, Heritage Action, which is the Heritage Foundation, let's be clear. They had that confab, and the video apparently leaked of them gloating over all the voter suppression bills that they have on a template. All that these state legislatures have to do is just fill in the blanks. And they gloated even more about the pressure that they put on Joe Manchin in particular to fight against H.R. 1. And what has Joe Manchin been doing? Fighting against H.R. 1. Now, we could put the term pressure in scare quotes, because maybe the pressure was lots of dollars. I accused him of being a bottom feeder because, you look at what these electeds on the right-wing side sell out their country for. The amount of dollars they sell out their country for is only a few thousand. $2,500, $3,200. That's it. That's all it takes to sell out the country, the United States of America. But I was reminded that Joe Manchin's daughter did jack the price up of the EpiPen from $70 to $300. So I guess he's not a bottom feeder, but he is a bottom feeder profiteer. He was very angry when that was brought up, and I can't remember who it was that mentioned it, but they went after that person, and we don't hear very much about that tete-a-tete anymore, now do we? It's time we hear more about it. On the other hand, I've also been reminded that all it takes for Mitch McConnell to become majority leader once again is for Joe Manchin to become Republican. I don't know if that would happen. But you never know. We might offend Joe Manchin too much. Or is he being used as a foil willingly? Joe Biden, our president, has spoken with him some. Or maybe it's only been through proxy. Maybe Joe and Joe need a face-to-face. Two Joes in a bush. I'd like to see that. Anyway, at least Angus King, apparently this morning, he's been going back and forth a little bit, vacillating back and forth. I'm not going to get rid of the filibuster. Maybe I would. Nah, I'm not going to. Well, the last I heard is that he stated that given a choice between the filibuster and democracy, he will choose democracy. Now, I hope he's just not playing with words saying, I'm going to save democracy by saving the filibuster. I hope what he means is that if you have a choice, save the democracy. So we might have Angus on board. Kristen Sinema, I don't know. What's up with that? Because we are also being reminded that it's just those faces out there, they are getting the heat. Because there's some others that are bought off too. But they don't want to put their heads up. They're perfectly fine with Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema taking the heat. Is this the state of our politics right now? I mean, we're talking about a Reichstag fire here. We're talking a night of the long knives. We've even talked about Kristallnacht. It's all happening almost at once. And people are quibbling about, I don't know. This fascist organization called the Heritage Foundation teamed up with their fascist friends, the Federalist Society, have taken over our country. And if we let anybody know, it'll destroy the country. No. It'll expose the fascism within our ranks so we can eradicate it. You can't really deal with your problem until you admit that the problem exists. And then after you've admitted that it exists, you got to say something about it. You can't just keep it to yourself. And I don't want to hear about, we're finally hearing about UFOs. Yeah, I'd much rather hear about the unidentified fascist objects in our government. Those are the only UFOs I want to hear about. I want to identify the unidentified fascists. All right. I know a UFO is something that you can't really explain. That's why they're unidentified fascists. You can't explain why they're there, but except for the fact fascism wants to destroy democracy. It's almost like their prime directive, isn't it? Well, that's not the only thing happening in the world. Bibi Netanyahu is, he's having some problems now, isn't he? He's hanging on by a tether. Yeah, well, that's another corrupt government. I don't know. Having a little bit of karma happen to that Likud party and their fellows. Of course, the alternative to Likud isn't even more strict. Fundamentalist, really right-wing, extreme. The only way to get rid of Netanyahu is to get a guy even more extreme than Netanyahu. Under the auspices that they're not as corrupt. We're just more right-wing. We're not as corrupt, though. Oh, okay, well, that makes it better, huh? The only problem is that fascism begets corruption. For some weird reason. And so all the voting suppression measures are still going through, and we're pretending that that's not an issue. Joe Manchin, apparently, I'll get back to him here, because I don't understand why he doesn't see all of these bills that are being templated by the Heritage Foundation, by the way. He has nothing to say about it. Which also is, I guess, if you wanted to have guilt by association. Maybe Joe's been bought off. Maybe. Now, I don't know could this be like counter intel operation type dynamic here? Would the Heritage Action PAC, and the Heritage Foundation be this forward thinking? Would they leak this in some other way to sort of, divide the Democrats? Is that possible? It is possible. Now, I trust Jane Mayer from the New Yorker. I really think that she's a trusted journalist, and she came by that video. So there's a vetting process for that. So I'm hoping that, true investigative journalism prevails in the midst of this. But boy, are we in a lot of confusion. What's up? What's down? What's the color purple? Can't teach about the color purple because it might indoctrinate your kids into believing that, I don't know, racism exists. Why is it that only races want to, keep you from learning about racism existing? I don't understand that. You would think that they would, be happy. Yeah, they're unhappy because they can't be racist anymore. That's very important, apparently. Enough to divide a country and shoot each other over it? Oh, boy. They're calling for a civil war. Boy. I hope it doesn't happen. I really don't. Because I don't want to shoot people. I don't want to be shot at. I really don't. I mean, can't we just all get along? Please. Can't we? All right, enough of this Monday morning rambling rant. What's on the rest of the menu here in the Bistro Cafe as we start off on this River City Hash Mondays? Here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, well, at the top, of course, Press Secretary Jen Psaki cannot let the briefing room become a forum for propaganda, and good for her. And it's still sad to learn that, she's not long for the job, but she does have kids, and that's fine. Part of being good at your job is, training your replacements. On the rest of the menu, Black Voters Matter has redoubled its efforts amid a wave of GOP attacks on voting rights. Yeah, Joe Manchin, we're looking at you. A court will finally decide if private prison company GEO must pay ICE detainees a minimum wage or continue enslaving them in their forced labor camps. They've gone to court. Can't we just keep them as slaves? Please, they're not really people. And the Pentagon stands behind its extremism expert, who is targeted by the right-wing media and Trump insurgents in government. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where German Chancellor Angela Merkel's conservatives handily batted away a challenge from the far right in a state election. And it's something that was very important. And Normandy, France commemorated D-Day with small crowds, but a big heart. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, to the right of the page, is that chat room link, and that chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the left of that chat room link, near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, to the leftish there, is the link to our Patreon page. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, you not only help us pay our bills, fly under the radar, continue this resistance against the Nazi takeover of America, but also you help us fulfill our civic duty in doing so. Indeed, if you could afford an espresso-type coffee drink, and if you could afford to send those funds our way once a month, that allows us to, we pool that money with what we have in our own wallets, and we pay those said bills, and we fly under said radar, and we continue resisting as the founders originally intended. Thank you very much. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. Thanks, Tom. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam, all one word, N before M. Man spelled backwards, just so you know. Anyway, I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's about 10 minutes before showtime. Get that linked up on Twitter and other social media platforms. Looks like in another, 10, 11 days, I'll probably be back on Facebook. We don't know for how long. They tend to want to get rid of even the minor liberal voices. Jeez. Well, anyway, I do post the show notes and links diary on social media, so do look at those show notes and links. They're the important part of the real reportage. Follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West, and do please pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever podcasts can be found. Oh, and don't forget the music show on Sunday nights, the Justice Department Music Sans Frontières, Music Without Borders. That's available there too, so check it out. Hopefully it's a soothing hour for you. There's not really much in the way of talking. Yeah, but there is a story being told. You'll just have to sit down and listen. Okay, only if you want to. I'm not trying to force anyone. But Justice Department Music Sans Frontières goes off on Sunday nights at 8 p.m. Pacific, and then is available on podcasts. Check it out. Okay, this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Ash Mondays, is from the Associated Press by way of the American Independent. LaTosha Brown opened with a song. Speaking about voting rights one recent spring day in Selma, Alabama, the black activist delivered the civil rights anthem, Keep Your Eyes on the Prize, in a voice showcasing her background as a jazz singer. She told her audience through music that the fight for equal access to the ballot was as urgent as ever. The song drew cheers from a few dozen listeners, young and old, who had gathered before the brown-bricked African Methodist Episcopal Church in a city known for its poverty, as much for its troubled racial past. For Brown, co-founder of Black Voters Matter, the song served to introduce a question. Close your eyes, she said. What would America look like without racism? How will we ever create what we are not even envisioning? There was nothing that was brought into the real world that was not first envisioned. I used to say when I was younger, all reality once was dream. You have to dream it first and then make it so. A year after the police killing of George Floyd galvanized public attention to racial injustices, amid a barrage of restrictive voting laws being passed by state legislatures, Brown's group is redoubling its effort and its march toward its North Star, increasing the political power of black communities. Like many groups that serve predominantly black communities, the organization was flooded with donations after Floyd's death. A year later, the impact is visible. The group says it gave $10 million to 600 community-based groups in 15 states, mostly in the South, who, among other things, registered voters, distributed flyers about the importance of voting, held phone banks, sent millions of text messages, canvassed communities reminding people to vote, and rented buses to drive people to the polls. Everything that's going to be made illegal. You talk to someone about voting, you have to go to jail. Those efforts are widely credited with helping fuel black voter turnout in Georgia, which in part led to Democrats scoring victories in the presidential and U.S. Senate races that gave them control of both houses of Congress and helped President Joe Biden enact his legislative agenda. Now, in the face of new restrictions on voting in areas heavily populated by people of color, new challenges are emerging. Well, you would expect that when there's a Nazi takeover of America. Brown estimates that Black Voters Matter, which received more than $30 million in donations last year, has about 90,000 unique donors. Most of its donations were small gifts from ordinary Americans. Now, the group's operations are run through two channels. One is the Black Voters Matter Fund, a social welfare organization that can engage in political activity like lobbying. The other is Black Voters Matter's Capacity Building Institute, a nonprofit that funds voter education, registrations, and other programs to expand access to voting. Contributions to the Capacity Building Institute are tax-deductible. Donations to the fund are not. After the racial justice protests, most of the donations flowed into the Capacity Building Institute, which from June of 2020 to the end of last year received $18 million, a jump of more than 400% from the amount it collected in 2019. Brown says $3 million earmarked for advocacy groups was distributed to several dozen community-based groups. An additional $7 million was given to help local organizations like the Alabama Association for the Arts to run their own operations and conduct voter engagement work, including voter registrations. Using a $17,000 grant from Black Voters Matter, the Alabama-based group funded a project called Lift Our Vote. It rented buses to help Alabamans get to polling locations, said Jessica Fortune Barker, the project's co-founder. On Election Day, they drove 10 routes across North Alabama. Isn't it interesting that the GOP is even trying to make it illegal to rent a bus to drive people to go vote? Okay. The roots of Black Voters Matter date to 2016. Born of the painful frustration, Brown says she and the organization's other co-founder, Cliff Albright, felt about the nationalist racist rhetoric of Donald Trump and a national discourse that did not include black folks. In philanthropy circles, Black Voters Matter is what's called an intermediary, an organization that donors can turn to when they want to fund nonprofits but lack the expertise or connections to do so directly. In the South, Black Voters Matter has become a powerful heart of an ecosystem of community-based organizations that are often too small for institutional funders to notice. Church groups involved in voter engagement, for example, or informal groups of women with backgrounds in voter drives. Oh, you mean like Acorn? I guess they're really going to get rid of it now. Look out for James O'Keefe. He's on his way. Next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is also by the Associated Press by way of the American Independent. After nearly 4 years of litigation and pandemic-related delays, a trial is underway to determine whether the GEO Group must pay minimum wage to detainees who perform cooking, cleaning, and other tasks at its Immigration Detention Center in Washington State. Detainees are typically paid $1 per day when they work shifts in the voluntary work program at the for-profit Northwest Detention Center in Tacoma. The state's minimum wage is now $13.69 per hour. I'd be curious what the commissary costs are. Pretty high, I would presume, as evidenced by how it works in all the rest of the prison systems, for-profit or not. Attorney General Bob Ferguson and some detainees filed separate lawsuits against GEO in 2017, arguing that the company's contract with the federal government requires it to follow state and local laws, including Washington's Minimum Wage Act, and that GEO, one of the nation's largest private detention companies, unjustly profited by paying so little. You know, when you have slave labor, it pretty much undercuts everybody else who does not have slaves. Tacoma-based U.S. District Judge Robert Bryan, who has rejected several attempts by GEO to dismiss the lawsuits, consolidated the cases for trial, which he is conducting via Zoom because of the pandemic. By mid-afternoon of last Tuesday, a jury of 9 people had been chosen. Opening statements took place on Wednesday. These cases are not about whether the government's contracting with private entities to operate detention facilities is a good or bad policy, the judge told potential jurors. These cases are also not about United States immigration policy or border issues. However, there are political undertones in 2014 amid a hunger strike by detainees. Immigrant rights activists tried to convince the governor's office and the State Department of Labor and Industries that detainees should be paid minimum wage for work performed there. After reviewing the matter, labor and industry officials determined that Washington did not have jurisdiction over the federal government's detainees for purposes of wage issues, according to public records obtained by GEO and filed in the case. In 2017, amid a flurry of lawsuits over the new Trump administration's immigration policies, Ferguson reached a different conclusion, saying GEO was exploiting Washington residents. The Democrats successfully sued Donald Trump that year over Trump's initial travel ban affecting 7 Muslim-majority nations, one of more than 80 lawsuits Ferguson filed against the administration. Trump's Justice Department sought and failed to have Washington's lawsuit against GEO dismissed, calling it an aggressive and legally unjustified effort by the state of Washington to interfere with federal immigration enforcement. In a separate effort, the state is now trying to close it entirely. Governor Jay Inslee signed a law passed by the Democratic-led legislature that would ban for-profit detention centers in Washington. GEO has sued to block it. Of the American Independent brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy River City Hash Mondays. The Department of Defense said it is standing by Bishop Garrison, a senior advisor to Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, despite attacks from Republican members of Congress, oh, you mean the insurgents, and right-wing media outlets, including Fox News. Garrison was appointed to his role at the Pentagon in February and currently leads the Countering Extremism Working Group, which was established by Austin in April to review and update department policies regarding regarding extremism within the armed services. Garrison is a West Point graduate who served 2 tours in Iraq with the U.S. Army and worked as an advisor to President Barack Obama's 2012 re-election campaign and to former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign in 2016. Oh, no wonder they're trying to get rid of him. Garrison has been criticized by the right for his tweets about Trump, in particular tweets in which he said support for him, meaning Trump, is a racist, is support for all his beliefs. And he's dragging a lot of bad actors, misogynists, extremists, and other actors out into the light, normalizing their actions. If you support the president, you support that. Garrison made those comments following Donald Trump's attack on the late Representative Elijah Cummings, who represented Baltimore, Maryland. Trump had tweeted of the majority black city, "No human being would want to live there," and called it a disgusting rat and rodent-infested mess. But now, years later, the right, including GOP lawmakers, have lashed onto those tweets after they resurfaced in a right-wing hit piece published in an outlet called Revolver on the 5th of May. The outlet called Garrison a critical race theory-loving Donald Trump derangement syndrome suffering, fake news spreading, 100% partisan hack. Oh, I guess they don't like him because he's black. All right, let's get to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world. And we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, nice try. As any chef can tell you, having all the right ingredients doesn't guarantee that the palate will be satisfied. Netflix viewers have recently flocked to Joe Wright's new psychological thriller, Woman in the Window, but from looking at audience and critics' reviews, not coming away particularly happy. It has an interesting enough plot. Child psychologist Anna has had a breakdown and is agoraphobic, stuck in her pricey New York brownstone, where she becomes interested in new neighbors with issues that indicate secrets and with few curtains. It stars Amy Adams, Gary Oldman, Jennifer Jason Leigh, Julianne Moore, and Tracy Letts, who also came up with the screenplay from A.J. Finn's best-selling novel. There's cinematography from Coen Brothers collaborator Bruno Delbonnel and a score from Danny Elfman. And who can't help rooting for a distraught gaslighting victim? So what went wrong? Well, it's not any one thing. One of our other Take-Two reviewers noted that the film is absolutely faithful to the novel and that the dialogue seems not to have translated well to the screen. There are questions as to why certain characters are in some scenes, and sometimes why they're as overwrought as they are. There are homages. We actually see Anna viewing a clip of Rear Window while chilling and drinking, which is cute, but may more serve to remind us that this is certainly not that movie. Saving this one might be that the build-up from the first act is compelling enough to pique interest sufficient to stick with it. As the Woman in the Window's action shifts to the roof near the conclusion, you'll know exactly how the bad guy's going to get his. Anna is vindicated, but in sort of a final narrative insult, that vindication comes with therapeutic benefits that don't seem realistic. This has been Take-Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at Take2MovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
Hi, and welcome to COVID Quickly, a Scientific American podcast series.
This is your fast-track update on the COVID pandemic. We bring you up to speed on the science behind the most urgent questions about the virus and the disease. We demystify the research and help you understand what it really means.
I'm Tanya Lewis.
And I'm Josh Fishman.
We're Scientific American's senior health editors. Today, we're going to explain how COVID deaths have been seriously undercounted in many parts of the U.S.
And we'll discuss the raging debate over the origins of the pandemic-causing virus, a wild animal or a sloppy human lab. We know that COVID has caused an unthinkable number of deaths, more than 500,000 in the U.S. alone. But you've been looking at new research, Tanya, and could the true number of deaths during the pandemic be even larger?
Yes, scientists have looked at the number of excess deaths, or deaths beyond the amount you'd expect in a typical year, and showed that there were far more deaths than usual in 2020 at the national and state levels. In a new preprint study, Andrew Stokes, a professor of population health at Boston University, and his colleagues calculated excess deaths at the county level. They found big disparities in how these deaths were attributed to COVID in different parts of the country. Rural counties, especially ones in the South and West, had the highest rates of excess deaths not attributed to COVID. Some of these were likely COVID deaths that were misattributed to other illnesses, especially early on when COVID testing was limited. Others may have been deaths from other causes that indirectly resulted from the pandemic's social and economic fallout.
Why did this miscount occur more often in rural areas?
In cities, deaths often happen in hospitals where doctors or medical examiners pronounce the cause of death. But in rural areas, the job is often done by coroners or other elected officials who don't have a medical background. Stokes and his team hypothesized that in some cases, a coroner's political views might have influenced their likelihood of attributing a death to COVID. Regardless of what caused the deaths, it's important to understand the true impact the pandemic has had on communities, especially those that were disproportionately affected by it. The big noisy argument this week is about the origin of the coronavirus that causes COVID. Was SARS-CoV-2 a spillover from wild animals, or did it escape from a lab in China? You've written about this dispute, Josh. What's your take on all this?
In my opinion, Tanya, we need less opinion and more facts. Both of these theories are largely fact-free. They're both built on assumptions and circumstantial evidence. That hasn't stopped politicians and journalists from sounding off about them. There are piles of assumption behind the lab leak idea. One is that the virus had unique features that could only have been genetically engineered in a lab. That's not been proven. In fact, one feature actually appears in a bunch of related coronaviruses. Another notion is that the Wuhan Institute of Virology, in the same city where the virus was first detected, was sloppy. Perhaps the lab brought the virus in, then infected workers carried it to the community. The lab took its database of collected viruses offline. Perhaps it did so to hide this link. Labs can be sloppy, but there's no direct evidence for this sequence. We've got nothing showing that SARS-CoV-2 was in the lab before the outbreak.
Many scientists think a natural spillover event from wildlife is a likely scenario, but that requires some assumptions too, right?
Yep, it's this. In nature, billions of coronaviruses are constantly mutating, and perhaps one went from bats into another animal. Then it jumped to humans. It's an assumption because nobody has found the mystery animal.
That does seem like a big missing piece.
It is, but it takes a long time to find these missing links. After the original SARS disease broke out in 2003, it took 14 years for scientists to find bats that first had the virus. After HIV was detected, it took almost 20 years to find its route through chimpanzees. Still, you're right, it's a gaping hole.
So is there anyone out there taking the right approach to figuring out where SARS-CoV-2 came from?
Yes, Joe Biden is. Last week, the Director of National Intelligence announced that U.S. spy agencies thought all of these ideas fell way short of proof. So Biden told them to go back to the drawing board, gather more facts, and give us a report in 90 days. Also, some respected researchers published a letter in the journal Science saying both ideas needed to be considered and scientists need to collect better evidence. It's the same message. Stop bloviating opinions based on assumptions and go get some facts.
Do you think that's going to give us an answer?
I hope so. Probably not as fast as talking heads want. Remember how many years it took for those other diseases. But we should have a more informed idea of coronavirus origins if we stick to the evidence.
Now you're up to speed. Thanks for joining us.
Come back in 2 weeks for the next episode of COVID Quickly. And check out SciAm.com for updated and in-depth COVID news.
A social distancing tip.
While the CDC urges you to avoid close contact, like hugging or shaking hands, there are other non-physical ways to say hello. Wave, wink, use sign language, salute, smile, give the peace sign, throw up an air high five, do jazz hands. Remember, stay a minimum of 6 feet or 2 arms length away from others and stay home if you can. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1912. That was the day Boston Carmen of Local 589 voted to strike. Workers had been fighting to organize for years. They now demanded union recognition. In the months before the strike, union representatives had attempted to meet with management with no success. The president of the L, in the days before it was called the T, went so far as to summarily fire 282 employees, claiming the need to maintain discipline. Incensed at the union-busting maneuver, workers walked off the job in the early hours of the morning. They began cutting trolley ropes, smashing train windows, and removing handles on controller boxes. In an effort to bust the strike, management formed a company union. They also brought in over 700 professional strikebreakers and provided housing for the scabs. Over the course of several weeks, dozens of strikers were arrested on charges that ranged from calling strikebreakers scabs to trumped-up felony charges. AFL President Samuel Gompers visited the picket line in a show of solidarity. Area labor unions provided financial and legal support. The union filed charges with the State Board of Arbitration. They argued management had caused the strike by firing hundreds of workers for union activity and coercing workers against joining the union. Once the board confirmed the union's charges, the governor and mayor both pushed for resolution. As well, Boston's Central Labor Union threatened a general strike. Union recognition finally came on July 28th, and the first contract was signed a year later. Since that time, Local 589 has weathered more than a century of anti-union storms as it continues to fight for better wages, hours, and conditions. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy River City Hash Mondays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 49 degrees Fahrenheit. Expecting much cooler temperatures than what we have had recently, expecting only a high of around 68. Mostly cloudy throughout the day. Winds will be out of the west-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Shifting tonight out of the northwest at 5 to 10, with lows in the mid-40s and mainly cloudy conditions. Partly cloudy tomorrow. Highs remaining the same, about 68, with winds out of the west at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Confirmed cases of coronavirus have not been updated since Friday, but the Friday totals from late Friday now stand at confirmed cases for coronavirus in Jackson County in the southern part of Oregon at 11,314, which was an increase, and deceased remain at 145. And those are confirmed, and those totals will increase by late Tuesday. Grass pollen is rated high outside the window in Rogue River proper. The air quality index for the region is good at 32 parts per million, and the daytime UV index remains very high at 9, even with these cloudy conditions. Barometric pressure is falling at 29.96 inches. Visibility is at 10 miles, and relative humidity is at 72%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world, and that is known as the Weather Underground. London is 73 and partly cloudy. Paris is 75 and sunny. Rome is 78 and fair. Kyiv is 76 and fair. Kabul is 88 and fair. Hong Kong is 80 degrees and fair. Tokyo is 70 and partly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 58 and partly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 54 and fair. And New York is a scorching 86 degrees Fahrenheit and fair. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Frank Jordans of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Chancellor Angela Merkel's conservatives handily batted away a challenge from the far right in a state election yesterday, Sunday, that was seen as the last big test for Germany's political parties before a national vote in September. Projections by public broadcaster ARD put Merkel's center-right Christian Democratic Union at 36.6%, a gain of more than 6 percentage points compared to the last election 5 years ago in the sparsely populated state of 2.2 million inhabitants. The far-right Alternative for Germany was projected to get 22% of the vote, a slight drop compared to 2016. The party has moved steadily further to the right in recent years, and its chapter in Saxony-Anhalt has come under increased scrutiny from Germany's domestic intelligence service for its ties to extremist groups.
Je te donne c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Sylvie Corbet of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. When the sun rises over Omaha Beach, revealing vast stretches of wet sand extending toward distant cliffs, one starts to grasp the immensity of the task faced by Allied soldiers on June 6, 1994, landing on the Nazi-occupied Normandy shore. The 77th anniversary of D-Day was marked yesterday, Sunday, with several events to commemorate the decisive assault that led to the liberation of France and Western Europe from Nazi control and honor those who fell. On D-Day, more than 150,000 Allied troops landed on the beaches codenamed Omaha, Utah, Juno, and Sword and Gold, carried by 7,000 boats. This year, on June 6th, the beaches stood vast and nearly empty as the sun emerged exactly 77 years since the Dawn invasion. For the second year in a row, anniversary commemorations are marked by virus travel restrictions that prevented veterans or families of fallen soldiers from the U.S., Britain, Canada, and other allied countries from making the trip to France. Only a few officials were allowed exceptions. At the newly built British Normandy Memorial near the village of Vers-sur-Mer, bagpipes played memorial tunes and warplanes zipped overhead, trailing red, white, and blue smoke. Socially distanced participants stood in awe at the solemnity and serenity of the site, providing a spectacular and poignant view over Gold Beach and the English Channel. The new monument pays tribute to those under British command who died on D-Day and during the Battle of Normandy. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up tomorrow for Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.